Hey everyone, on our last video about capital punishment, um, I thought we'd uh, talked our point to death, no pun intended, but
Death by YouTube video. Yeah.
but actually today John told me some questions that had been brought up by people afterwards, or have you just thought of them?
I did a little bit more
on your own?
investigating on
Okay.
my own, and realized that we missed something that I thought was kind of important.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the balance between justice and mercy, the relationship between those two concepts, theologically. So,
Yeah.
this is about theology. So, talking from a theological perspective.
And we just spent like 20 minutes sitting here talking about it off camera.
Yeah,
so that
and we're going to try and do this faster than 20 minutes because our last video was long. And this one we should be able to do shortly.
Let's hope.
We're just going to tackle these 4 questions and see if that helps give some insight into why there are different views in the Christian community on this, on whether or not the death penalty ought to be a thing. So the first question: is the death penalty just?
So I think, and I said this to you earlier, but I think it depends on your standpoint. Like from a cold, like a more Old Testament perspective, yes, it is definitely just.
Right.
But when you throw the new covenant with Christ into the mix, I think it makes things a lot more complicated. And like we talked about in the main video, we're supposed to be merciful and give people basically infinite opportunities to repent.
Right. Yes. And so the verses that I found that I don't remember if we even brought up last time was Genesis 9:6 and a bunch of Numbers chapter 35. Genesis 9:6 says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed." And then it gives a reason. For God made man in his own image. So if you take a life, your life is forfeit, according to Genesis 9:6, because what you did is against an eternal and holy God. Because you murdered someone made in his image, somebody created by God. Numbers 35 says, you should not pollute the land where you live. Murder pollutes the land. It actually says bloodshed, which is the term for murder. And then it says you can't even make atonement for the land where blood has been shed except by the blood of the one who shed it, which means the person who murdered, their life is forfeit and needs to be taken in order to make atonement for that land. Now what has changed, of course,
is Christ.
Yeah, he made atonement already. That's the whole thing. he has made atonement. So at least on the spiritually polluting the land part, if your sin has been put on Christ, then atonement has been made. That you could make the case for Saul of Tarsus, who was implicated in the murder of Stephen.
And even David, if you remember the whole situation
Yes.
with Uriah and Bathsheba.
Yes, exactly. Good.
That whole fiasco.
Yeah. And so these were ones who repented, turned to Christ, and their sins were forgiven. So atonement was made. The other question that goes along with this is, are Christians morally obligated to choose mercy over justice?
And I think that might be something we touched on in the last video. I don't remember if we mentioned it, but and I don't even know who said it in the Bible, but I think it's God directly saying, "Vengeance is mine. Let me take care of it."
Yep, that's in the Old and New Testament. It's quoted in the New Testament. Yes, so that's a good point. That is what God says. And I do think that there is ample evidence in both Testaments, Old and New, that Christians are morally obligated to choose mercy as much as possible. Now, the next question is, well, the ones performing capital punishment are not necessarily Christians. It's the government. It's the state. Does the state have the same moral obligation as the individual Christian? And that's where I don't think we addressed this very well last time.
Yeah.
There is a difference between me as an individual and the government. And the government's role is to protect the citizens. And so I think there is a good case to be made, and many Christians will make it.
Including most of the prominent theologians.
Yeah, a lot of conservative theologians. I just listened to three: Albert Mohler, John Piper, Wayne Grudem. Name drop some of the guys I was listening to on this. These guys are prominent scholars and theologians and pastors in the Protestant Christian church, and every one of them said there is a place for capital punishment. And they quoted Genesis 9:6 and Numbers 35. And
did they ever quote anything from the New Testament?
Yeah, the Romans.
Oh, really?
When Paul says, "Does the government bear the sword for nothing?"
Oh, that's right. You told me that earlier.
They did say that. That was one of the things I pointed out. Also, the fact is that even with Christ's atonement for the land, the other reason given in Genesis 9 that for capital punishment is that you have murdered an image bearer. That hasn't changed. You're still, if you take a human life, you're still taking the life of an image bearer, and that's still a pretty big deal. So does the state have an obligation to do capital punishment to protect its citizens? And I think what we ended up talking about is in some times and places in history, there wasn't really another good option. If you don't have a prison system or a place to put them to keep your people safe, then capital punishment made a lot of pragmatic sense, right?
It was more efficient.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. And so the idea there was not we're taking away that criminal's opportunity to repent. The idea was we are giving that person to God and let God judge what to do with this person. And there was an expressed, and you've heard this before in movies and TV shows, where they would say, this person has been sentenced to death for their crime, and then they end by saying, may God have mercy on your soul or on their soul. And that statement is meant to indicate that it implies that they want God to have mercy on their soul. But just by saying that, right, you're saying, we're not sending you to hell. We're sending you to God. God will decide what to do with you.
Although, like we talked about off camera, I think it might have actually meant something the first couple times they said that, but then it sort of lost its meaning and became part of the rote, part of the ritual of execution, and
right,
people might not have even meant that anymore.
Right,
when they said it.
And so people's hearts might have been more bloodthirsty, in other words,
or gotten that way,
got over time. But the initial reason you say that hasn't changed. Like the even if it became rote, the purpose of the statement is a true theologically, from a theological perspective, it's a true statement. We want God to have mercy on your soul. We don't want you to go to hell. And I think that's important to remember, and that's why there's a disconnect in the church between Christians about whether or not the death penalty should be a thing.
Although you mentioned when we were talking earlier that you said it was a way to get very serious offenders out of the community.
Yes.
And
well, because like you don't want a known murderer living
right
next door, right? Like, and especially if you didn't know, like, oh, he was a murderer.
And that's where I think times have changed, because this is 2021. We have other options other than just killing murderers. At least in the U.S., we have a very, very sophisticated prison system, and our laws do have something called a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize if I sound like I'm talking down.
But no, it's you're being logical, and we want people to follow along and understand our logic. And you were right. There is every available piece of infrastructure in our country in this time to give somebody a life sentence and not kill them.
Yeah, we have the infrastructure potentially to completely phase out the death penalty.
Yes.
To make it completely
And
unnecessary.
we nearly have. To be fair, we very nearly have. Almost. And so what I haven't done is read all the statistics on what are the crimes of the people who we have put to death in the last few years.
Right.
I don't know. But I do know lots of murderers are not killed in our country. There's a lot more murder than there are capital punishment cases. So I know that we don't follow the biblical Old Testament death penalty, capital punishment laws. We have our own, and our own leans towards mercy. And we are agreed that that's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
right?
We
want mercy.
We were talking about this earlier, and I remember still being confused why you were still sort of saying there is a place for death penalty, and I thought that made me think of, funnily enough, a quote from Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Where Frodo and Gandalf are talking about Smeagol, aka Gollum, for those of you who hadn't read it. And Frodo says, it's a pity my uncle didn't kill Smeagol when he had the chance. And Gandalf's like, what do you mean? It's pity that kept him from killing him, and we don't know
what part he has to play.
What effect that's going to have.
Yeah.
For all we know, killing Smeagol could have robbed the entire world of something that would have helped it. And as the story goes on, it does. So
Yes.
I think it applies to capital punishment by the state as well. Like, we don't know if or when someone is going to repent, and if or when they might even not only do a full repent, but do a full 180 and do something beneficial. So if we just execute someone, we're potentially robbing the world of a chance, however slim it might be, of being benefited in some way.
Right. Yeah. And the flip side is, by not executing them, we might send a message to other would-be murderers that their penalty isn't going to be that bad.
So there is
that argument.
There's a risk involved in either course of action.
Right. It's a complicated one.
I would definitely lean heavily more towards the side of mercy, both for individuals and for the state.
Okay. And I would lean in 100% to mercy for the individual, and very seldom allow for exceptions for the state, just for the sake of justice itself, and to send a message that we take murder very seriously, we take life seriously, and we want to promote it. So we slightly differ, but at the end of the day, we do want everyone to repent and go and be with God and live in heaven and all of that. We agreed on that, and that's really, really important. So we've taken too much of your time.
Yeah,
We're
this
going to be done.
little bonus episode took a lot longer than we thought. So
it did. I'm going to stop
soon.
it.